A fist came down hard on the ring canvas. The whole floor shook. Ropes snapped tight and hummed. A cat bolted across the mat, low and fast, tail flat. A big man laughed and slammed his glove into the corner post again. Wood cracked. Dust drifted down from the rafters. He was huge. Military huge. Thick neck, shaved clothes, hands like cinder blocks. He planted both feet in the center of the ring and pointed one glove across the canvas. "Hit me first," he said, grinning. The smaller man on the other side did not move. He did not raise his hands. He just watched. That smaller man was Bruce Lee, and in the next 4 seconds he would do something that made a heavyweight champion drop his guard and go quiet. What did Bruce Lee do that a trained fighter never saw coming? Stay with me on this one. The gym sat at the bottom of a narrow street in Chinatown, behind a laundry and below a family that argued every night at 7. You had to know it was there to find it. There was no sign on the door, just a green door with the paint peeling off, and a set of wooden stairs that groaned under your feet like they were warning somebody you were coming. Inside, it was one room, a ring in the middle, a few heavy bags hanging on chains, a rack of wooden dummies lined up against the wall like patient men. The floor got swept twice a day, and Bruce Lee did the sweeping himself. He believed a man who wouldn't clean his own floor had no business teaching anyone how to stand on it. He believed a lot of small things like that, and he lived by every one of them, and that was part of what made the room feel different the second you walked in. Now, Bruce was not a big man. 5'7", maybe 140 pounds soaking wet. But if you ever watched him move, you forgot all about the numbers. He moved like the air owed him a favor. Students came from all over the city just to stand in that room and watch him do things that shouldn't have been possible with a human body. He'd stand a man in front of him, tell him exactly what he was about to do, and then do it anyway, and the man still couldn't stop it. That's a hard thing to explain to somebody who wasn't there. You had to see it. And prowling that room always was the cat. His name was Jun. He was a stray, a scarred old tomcat with one torn ear and a coat the color of wet ash. He'd wandered in through a broken window 2 winters back, half-starved, and Bruce had put down a bowl of rice with a little fish on top. That was it. From that day on, the cat owned the place. Jun had one habit that everybody in the gym knew. During every sparring session, he climbed up onto the top rope and walked it. Balanced up there like it was a sidewalk. He'd pace back and forth along the ropes while fists flew below him, calm as anything, watching the fighters with those flat yellow eyes. Bruce used to point up at him and tell his students, "Look at that. Look how still he is inside all that motion." That, he'd say, is what I'm trying to teach you. The cat already knows it, and the students would laugh, and then they'd try it and they'd find out how hard it was to be still inside all that motion, and they'd stop laughing. Here's the thing about Bruce in those days. He was starting to get famous, but not in the way he wanted. He'd done a little television. People recognized his face on the street. And every time somebody got famous for fighting, a certain kind of man came looking for him. The kind who wanted to be the one who beat him. The kind who showed up at the green door with something to prove. They came all the time. Boxers, wrestlers, big karate men with black belts and bad attitudes, guys off the docks who'd knocked out everyone in their neighborhood. And Bruce had a rule about all of them. He never turned anyone away, and he never fought them for real unless he had to. Most of the time, he just showed them. He'd let a man throw everything he had, and the man would hit nothing but air over and over until he was gasping and confused and a little humbled. Then Bruce would smile and offer him tea. He always offered tea. That was his way of saying, there are no hard feelings. We are just 2 men in a room. And most of them took it, because there's something about swinging as hard as you can at a man and missing 40 times in a row that knocks the fight right out of you. They'd sit down, red-faced, breathing hard, and they'd drink the tea, and half of them ended up asking if they could come back and learn. Bruce always said yes. The word about that little gym spread, down through the boxing world, through the gyms and the back rooms and the training camps. There's a Chinese fellow in Chinatown, they said. Small guy, can't be touched. And in a world full of men who made their living touching other men very hard, that kind of talk travels fast. It reached the wrong ears. There was a heavyweight in town that summer, a champion. His real name was Cassius Brennan, but the sports writers called him the Louisville Lip on account of he never stopped talking. He talked before fights, during fights, after fights. He talked in his sleep, his people said. He was 6'4" and 230 pounds of trained muscle, and he had never in his whole professional life lost a fight he cared about winning. Brennan had heard the stories about the little man who couldn't be hit, and it bothered him. It sat in his chest like a stone. Because in his world, a fighter's whole worth came down to one thing. Could you land a punch and could you take one? That was the entire religion. And here was some little dancer in a back alley gym, and people were saying he was better than the men Brennan spent his life beating. People were saying his name in rooms where they used to only say Brennan's. That's the part that really got under his skin. Not the man. The name, showing up where it didn't belong. He decided to go find out for himself. Now understand what that meant. When a champion decides to walk into your gym uninvited, it is never really a friendly visit. There's always a crowd behind him. There's always money somewhere in the background. And there's always the quiet understanding that if you embarrass him, you have made yourself a real problem. Bruce knew all of this. He'd been in America long enough to know exactly how it worked, and exactly how much a small man from Chinatown was allowed to win before the winning turned dangerous. There's a line, and he knew right where it was, and he knew that men like Brennan carried that line around with them and dared you to step over it. But Bruce didn't spend his days worrying about it. He taught. He swept his floor. He fed his cat. And on the afternoon it all started, he was doing the simplest thing in the world. He was sitting on the edge of the ring with a cup of tea, watching Jun walk the top rope in the empty gym, when the wooden stairs began to groan under a lot of weight. More weight than one man, boots, several sets of them, coming up slow, in no hurry at all, the way men climb when they know they've got all the time in the world and they want you to hear them coming. Bruce set his cup down on the canvas. He didn't stand up. He just turned his head toward the green door and waited. The door opened without a knock. Cassius Brennan filled the whole frame. He had to duck to come through it. He wore a tan suit that must have cost more than the gym's rent for a year, and a smile that had sold 1,000 tickets. Behind him came 3 men. 2 were clearly there to stand around and look like walls. The third was smaller, older, sharp-eyed, in a gray suit, with a cigar he wasn't smoking so much as chewing. That was Duke Farrow, Brennan's manager. Duke's eyes went around that little room once fast, and you could see him adding everything up. The peeling paint. The wooden dummies. The one small man sitting on the edge of the ring. And you could see him decide, right there, that there was nothing in this room worth being afraid of. He was wrong about that, but he didn't know it yet. Brennan spread his arms wide and looked around like he just walked into a barn. "So this is the place," he said. His voice filled the whole room without trying. "This is where the magic happens." He laughed, and the 2 wall men laughed with him, a half-second late the way paid men laugh. Bruce stood up. He was polite, he always was. He gave a small nod, the kind you give a guest, and he said, "Welcome. Can I offer you some tea?" Brennan looked down at him from a full head taller. "Tea," he said, like it was the funniest word he'd ever heard. He turned to Duke. "He wants to give me tea." Then he looked back at Bruce, and the smile stayed on his mouth but left his eyes. "I didn't come here for tea, little man. I came to see the trick. Everybody's talking about the little fella who can't be hit." He took 1 step forward, and the floor took his weight and complained about it. "So show me, hit me." And up on the top rope, quiet as a shadow, the old cat stopped walking and sat down to watch. Bruce didn't move toward him. He kept his hands loose at his sides and he kept his voice easy. "I don't fight for demonstrations," he said, "but you're welcome to watch a class. You're welcome to learn something if you want to." That was the wrong thing to say to a man like Brennan, not because it was rude. Because it wasn't, because it was calm. A man like Brennan knew exactly what to do with an angry man, or a scared man, or a man trying to impress him. He had no idea what to do with a man who simply wasn't bothered by him. And that, more than anything, is what made him climb into the ring. He ducked through the ropes and the whole ring dipped under him. He rolled his neck. He shrugged out of his suit jacket and tossed it to Duke without looking. Underneath, his shoulders were enormous. He raised his hands, not all the way, just enough, and he planted both feet in the center of the canvas like he was putting down roots. Then he grinned that ticket-selling grin, and he pointed one big hand across the ring at Bruce. "Hit me first," he said. "Go on, free shot. Best you got, right on the chin." He tapped his own jaw twice with 2 fingers. "And if you can't do it, if you so much as touch me and I don't feel it, then you shut this circus down and you stop letting people say your name in the same breath as mine." The gym went quiet. Even Duke stopped chewing his cigar. Bruce walked to the center of the ring. He stopped an arm's length from the biggest man he had ever faced. He looked up at him and something in his face changed. Not fear, not anger, something closer to sadness almost. Like a teacher looking at a student who has asked the wrong question for the right reasons. "I'm not going to hit you first," Bruce said quietly. Brennan's grin widened. "Course you're not," he started to say. He never finished it. Bruce's right hand moved. Nobody in that room saw it travel. There was no wind-up, no shift of the shoulder, no warning at all. One moment his hand was at his side and the next, 2 fingertips touched Brennan's chin. Tap. Then the left, tap against the ribs. Then the right again, tap back to the chin, light as a moth landing. 3 touches. 3 different places on a 230-pound champion, and all 3 of them landed before the big man could so much as blink. Then Bruce stepped back and dropped his hands. For a second, nothing happened. Brennan just stood there. His grin was frozen halfway on his face, and his eyes had gone wide and strange because his body had just told him something his mind refused to believe. He had been touched 3 times, in the time it takes to think about being touched once, and he hadn't seen a single one of them coming. He lifted one glove-sized hand slowly and pressed his own fingers to his chin, right where Bruce had tapped, like he was checking that the spot was still there. His mouth opened. For the first time in his professional life, the Louisville lip could not find a single word. Bruce bowed to him, a real bow from the waist, respectful and complete. And when he came up, his voice was gentle. "Now," he said, "will you have that tea? And here's the thing." Brennan laughed. It wasn't the big performing laugh from before. It came out of him low and surprised, almost shaky, the laugh of a man who has just been shown something true. He shook his big head slowly, side to side, and he said, "Well, I'll be damned. I'll be damned, little man." He climbed back out through the ropes, and he sat himself down heavily on a wooden bench against the wall, and he took the small cup Bruce poured for him and held it in a hand that made it look like a thimble. For a moment, everything in that room went soft and easy. The 2 walls relaxed against the doorframe. Duke half smiled around his cigar. Brennan sipped the tea and made a face at how hot it was and laughed again. It was over. The champion had come. He'd been shown a magic trick. He'd taken it like a good sport, and now everybody could go home. The old cat stood up on the rope, stretched, and settled back into his slow patrol. Bruce leaned against the ropes and felt, for one breath, that maybe this had gone as well as these things ever go. It had not gone well at all, and the reason was sitting on the bench, chewing a cigar, because Duke Farrow had not laughed. Duke Farrow had watched his meal ticket get touched 3 times by a man half his size in front of 2 hired witnesses, and Duke's mind did not work like Brennan's. Brennan felt wonder. Duke felt arithmetic. He was already thinking about who those two wall men would tell and who they would tell, and how long before the story got out that a Chinatown gym rat had made the heavyweight champion of the world stand still like a scarecrow. In Duke's business, a story like that wasn't a story. It was a leak, and leaks got plugged. Duke took the cigar out of his mouth. "Cass," he said, and his voice was flat and cold and cut right through the easy quiet. "Get up." Brennan looked over, still smiling. "Duke, the man's got a hell of a..." I said get up. Duke didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. We got a fight in 6 weeks. 12,000 people paying to watch you be the toughest thing alive. And you're sitting in a basement letting some acrobat make a fool out of you. He turned his sharp eyes on Bruce, and every trace of politeness was gone. "You, that little trick, that was cute. But my boy wasn't trying." He points to a spot and taps it. "Sure, a schoolteacher can do that." He nodded to the two men by the door, and they came off the wall and stopped being decoration. "Now we're gonna find out what happens when he's not standing still for you." And just like that, the room was a different place. It wasn't about pride anymore. It had been the trick, the tap, the tea. That was a game between two fighters, and games have rules and games end. This was something else. Now there was money in it. There were witnesses. There was a manager who had decided that Bruce's little demonstration was a threat to a 12,000-seat payday, and men like Duke Farrow do not walk away from threats. They erase them. Bruce understood the shift instantly, the way you understand a change in the weather. This was no longer a man asking to be shown a trick. This was an organization deciding he was a problem and standing between him and the door. If you've made it this far and you feel that turn in your stomach, that's the story doing its job. Do me a favor and hit that subscribe button, because what happens next is the part I really want you to see. Duke walked a slow circle around the ring. "My boy fights for a living," he said, still talking to Bruce, but really talking to the two men now, lining them up. 20 years he's been hit by the hardest men on earth, and he's still standing. So here's the new demonstration. My two friends here are gonna come at you. Real. No tapping. And you're gonna show me all that magic works when somebody actually means it. And Cass," he pointed the wet end of his cigar at his own fighter, "you watch close. You watch what a real fight does to a dancer." Brennan set his teacup down slowly on the bench. He wasn't smiling now. "Duke," he said, "this isn't why we came." "It's exactly why we came," Duke said. "You just didn't know it yet." The two men were already through the ropes. They weren't boxers. Bruce could tell that in a glance by the way they moved. They were the other kind, the kind a manager keeps around for reasons that have nothing to do with sport. One had a roll of coins in his fist. The other had slipped something out of his sleeve, short and dark, a leather sap weighted with lead. They came in from two sides, slow, spreading out, the way men do when they've done this before, and they're in no rush because they think the ending is already written. You could see it in their faces. They weren't worried. To them this was just work. Up on the top rope, the old cat rose to his feet. Bruce moved to the center of the ring so neither man could get fully behind him. His hands came up, but not into fists, open, loose. He spoke once more, and it was aimed at all of them. "There is no reason for this," he said. "Nobody has to be hurt here. Walk out the door and it never happened." He gave them a full breath to take it. Nobody took it. Duke laughed. The man with the sap swung it. And this is the part everybody remembers who was ever told this story. Because Bruce did not do what a fighter does. He didn't hit back. The sap came at his head, and he simply wasn't where it landed. He'd rolled his whole body off the line of it so smooth it looked lazy, and the weighted leather whistled through empty air and dragged the man off balance behind it. The second man lunged with the coins, and Bruce turned that one too, a hand on the wrist, a shift of the hip, and the big roll of coins buried itself into the sap man's shoulder instead of Bruce's skull. The two of them tangled. And through all of it, Bruce's hands never once closed into a fist. He redirected. He turned. He let their own weight and their own bad intentions do all the damage, and he stood in the eye of it calm, exactly the way he'd told his students 100 times, exactly the way the cat walked the rope. They went at him again, together this time, having figured out that one at a time wasn't working. It didn't matter. Bruce moved between them like water finding the low spot, and they collided with each other where he'd just been, and the coins man cursed and the sap man staggered, and neither of them had laid a finger on him. Duke stopped laughing somewhere in there. He'd seen a lot of fights in a lot of back rooms, and he had never once seen two armed men throw everything they had at a man and come up with nothing but bruises they'd given each other. The sap man got his feet back and came again, wild now, embarrassed, swinging for real. And here is the moment the whole story is really about. Bruce had him. In that instant the big man's chin was open, his hands were down, his throat was right there. One strike, the real thing this time, and the man would have gone down and stayed down. Everyone in that room saw it. Brennan saw it half off the bench now. Duke saw it and went still. The opening was there, clean and complete, and every fighter alive would have taken it. Bruce didn't take it. He stepped back instead. He let the opening close. He let the man stumble past him and catch himself on the ropes, gasping, unhurt, alive, and Bruce simply lowered his hands and stood there, breathing easy, having chosen, right in front of all of them, not to strike a man he could have destroyed. That, it turned out, was the loudest thing that happened in that whole room, louder than any punch. Because Brennan had spent his entire life around men who took the shot every single time, men who hit you when you were down because that was when it was easiest. And he had just watched a man who was better than all of them, faster than all of them, hold a life in his open hand and choose to set it down gently. Nobody moved. The two hired men stood bent over, sucking air, waiting for a blow that wasn't coming and not understanding why. Duke's cigar had gone out. And into that dead-still silence, the old cat did the thing that ended it. Jun stepped off the top rope. He landed light on the canvas, walked straight across the middle of that ring, past the two beaten men, past Bruce, and slipped out under the bottom rope. He crossed the floor with his tail up, calm as anything, walked right over to the wooden bench, and jumped up into Cassius Brennan's lap. The scarred old stray who trusted no one, who bolted from strangers, who Bruce himself had needed 2 winters to earn. He curled up on the champion's thigh, kneaded once with his paws, and began to purr. Brennan looked down at that ragged, one-eared cat sitting on him like he'd been invited, and something in the big man's face came apart. Slow, quiet. He reached down with one enormous hand, the hand that had knocked out more men than he could name, and he touched the cat's head as careful as if it were made of glass. And when he looked back up at Bruce, the ticket-selling grin was gone for good, and what was left underneath it was just a man, plainly and simply moved. "Get them out of my ring," Brennan said. Duke started to speak. "Cass, we." "Now, Duke." The champion stood up, and he stood up slow, the cat gathered against his chest in one arm like it weighed nothing. He looked at his manager, and it was a look I'd bet Duke Farrow had never once seen from him in 20 years. "You brought me here to prove I was the bigger man," he said. "And I am. I'm bigger than everybody." He looked at the 2 hired men still bent against the ropes, and his voice dropped. "And it never once in my whole life made me better than one single person." He turned to Bruce. "This man just showed me the difference. In 4 seconds and then in about 4 more. Get them out." Duke got them out. There wasn't anything else he could do. A manager only has the power his fighter gives him, and Brennan had just taken all of it back with one sentence. The 2 men went first, not looking at anybody, and Duke went after them, and at the green door he stopped and looked back once, and whatever he saw, he decided to keep whatever he'd been planning to say to himself. The wooden stairs groaned under them going down, slower than they'd come up. Then the street door shut, and it was just the 2 fighters and the cat. Brennan stood there a while, holding Jun, not saying much. Bruce poured fresh tea, the old cup having gone cold, and this time when he held it out, the big man took it with both hands and drank it slow and said thank you and meant it. They talked then. Not about fighting. Brennan wanted to know about the cat, how it had come in through the window half dead, how a man earns the trust of something that's been kicked its whole life. He wanted to know why Bruce hadn't taken the opening, that clean shot everybody saw. And Bruce told him the truth, the same thing he told his students, only quieter just for him. Anybody can learn to hit, he said. That takes a season. Learning when not to hit when you have every right to and every reason and the man deserves it and nobody would blame you. That takes your whole life. And most men never bother because there's no crowd for it. Nobody buys a ticket to watch you not throw a punch. He nodded at the cat asleep in the champion's arms, but he knows the difference. He's known it all along. That's why he came to you and not to them. Brennan looked down at Jun for a long moment. Then he laughed, soft, and shook his head, and said the strangest thing had just happened to him. He'd walked into that basement to find out if a small man could touch him. And he'd walked out understanding that he'd been the small one the whole time, in all the ways that a tape measure can't reach. He came back to that gym after that, more than once. Not for demonstrations and not for the newspapers, who never did get the real story. He came in through the green door quiet, a champion with nothing to prove, and he sat on the wooden bench and drank tea and watched the classes. And every time, sooner or later, the old cat left his rope and came and sat in his lap. Brennan used to say that was the honor that meant the most to him in a life full of belts and headlines. That a beat-up stray who'd learned the hard way which humans to trust had looked him over twice and decided he was safe. Duke Pharaoh drifted out of the picture within the year, the way that kind of man does when the fighter stops needing him to be afraid. The 12,000-seat fight happened, and Brennan won it. And afterward, when the reporters crowded in shouting about how it felt to be the toughest man alive, he surprised all of them. He said the toughest man he ever met was 140 pounds and taught school in a basement in Chinatown, and the reporters laughed, thinking it was a line, the Louisville lip being the lip. It wasn't a line, but some things you can't explain to a room full of people looking for a headline, so he let them laugh and he kept the real thing for himself. And here's how it ends. Years later, an old fighter sat with his grandchildren and told them about the day he walked into a gym to knock a little man down a peg. He told them about the 3 taps he never saw. He told them about the open hand that could have finished him and chose not to. But the part he always told last, the part he leaned in for, was about a scarred old cat that walked a ring rope high above 2 grown men swinging weapons at each other, calm as a Sunday, and then stepped down and chose a lap to sleep in. That's how you know a man, he'd tell them, not by who he can hit. Any fool can hit. You know a man by what walks up to him without being afraid. Remember that. It started with a fist coming down hard on a canvas, a big man daring a small one to hit him first. It ended with that same big man cradling a stray cat in a quiet room, understanding at last that the strongest thing he'd seen all day was the punch that Bruce Lee decided not to throw.